a time of refreshing. A time of refreshing. In the passage that we read this morning in 2 Samuel chapter 16, we see that King David is on the run for his life. Now, running for his life is not something that David was a stranger to, for we see in time past, before he was ever even anointed, when he was anointed king, but before he ever made it to the throne, Saul was hunting for his life. You see, Saul was king, but he was threatened by the fact that the presence of the Lord had left him. He was threatened by the fact that the anointing of the Lord was on this young man. And so he was threatened by it, and he sought to kill David's life. See, he didn't understand that he was still the king and he was still in a position of power, but all he saw was that this young man was threatening to take his position. But let me remind you that it was the Lord who put Saul in the position where he found himself in the first place. It was the Lord who had empowered Saul when Saul was small in his own sight. When Saul was hiding out amongst the baggage when they were looking to anoint him king, it was the Lord who promoted him to the place where he was. Right. But somewhere along the way, Saul got a little cocky. Yeah. Saul got a little proud. He started to see and look back at all the things and all the victories that the Lord had wrought through him. He saw the way that the Lord had delivered Israel time and time again at his own hand. But you see, what Saul didn't understand, that it was the Lord who used him to bring the victory. That's right. And Saul got a little full of himself, or a bit too much full of himself, and thought that he was king, and that he thought that he needed to eliminate this competition, if you will, eliminate this competition, this man who was vying for his place. But what he did not understand, that it was the same Lord that put him in that position, was the same man who rose David up from the shepherd, from the sheepfold, rose him up to take the place as king of Israel. Right. Saul refused to recognize the fact that the same Lord that had put him in that same position had rent the kingdom from his hands, right, because he thought that he could do it on his own. Because he thought that he was well able to continue on and to do things his own way. He thought that he could do things his own way and still get by. For you see, Saul got a little impatient when the time came to sacrifice before they were about to go to war. Saul got a little impatient because he thought that Samuel was taking a bit too much time to get to the place and to come to offer up the sacrifice. For that was his role. And so Saul decided that he was going to take it upon himself, that, sacrificing is the thing that we ought to do. So he took it upon himself to make the sacrifice. Right. But you see, that wasn't his role. Right. That wasn't his place. Right. He superseded the place of the priest. Why? Because he thought that because he was king, it was his right. But what he didn't understand was that the only power that was given to him was a power that the Lord had given him. That's right. He had no power in and of himself. But you see, this is something that David did recognize. For even as a shepherd boy, he was out in the fields, and because the Lord was with him, he slew the lion and he slew the bear. And that was only a practice run, because later on he would come to slew Goliath, as we know the story. But he recognized and he understood, even in the midst of all his problems, even in the midst of all his difficulties, he understood that it was the Lord that was with him. And it was the Lord who anointed him to do the great work that he did. He understood that it wasn't his little sling and his 5 little stones that he had that killed Goliath, but it was the fact that the Lord was with him, that the Lord had strengthened him, and the Lord kept him every step of the way. Right. And the reason the Lord kept him is because he sought after the Lord. That's right. At every turn, at every moment, at every junction in his life, David sought after the Lord and said, Lord, should I go or do I stay? Do I go forward and go and defeat the enemy, or should I hold my peace? Even in the time when they came back victorious from the battle, only to find that their wives and their families had been taken captive and taken into captivity. Even in the time when his men, who seconds earlier were looking to exalt him and were praising him, as soon as the news came that their family had been taken captive and that their family was in captivity by another enemy, they were ready to slew him. They were ready to kill him. Why? Because they allowed themselves to be carried away by the situation. They allowed their emotions to take over. They allowed their emotions to dictate their actions. But David, despite how he felt, despite the sorrow that came upon him, despite the tears that must have flowed through his face, he didn't allow himself to be dictated by his emotions. He didn't allow his direction and his actions to be controlled by his emotions. But he sought the one who had brought him through so many times before. And he said, Lord, should I go? Lord, should I overtake the enemy? Should I go forward? Should we go to battle or should we stay? And the Lord said, go, for you will overtake him. And so he went and he was victorious. At every junction in David's life, though he made mistakes, though he wasn't a perfect man by our standards, for we know that he had a share of difficulty. At every turn he turned, he sought the Lord for direction. And because of that, the Bible calls him a man after God's own heart. David was not a man who was a stranger to adversity. He was not a man who was a novice by any means. For even after he came to the kingship, even after he ascended to the throne, we see that his own family is seeking to kill him. Right. We see that the very fruit of his loins, one of his own son, has turned against him, has tried to turn the people's hearts away from the king so that he can take his place on the throne. Now you see, oftentimes when the Lord gives us a promise and we see the fulfillment of the promise, we start to get excited because we think that we've come to a place of rest. We think that we've arrived. We think that we've come to a place when finally we can take our ease and relax a little bit. Right. But just because the Lord has given us a promise, just because He's kept His word and brought us to the place that He said He would bring us, doesn't mean that our troubles are over. In fact, I dare say that when we come to that place of promise, it's almost when the trouble seems to intensify. It's just then when the battle gets hotter and the enemies seem to assail from us and they seem to come from every side to come and to destroy us. It seems that just at the moment when we've come to the place that the Lord has promised that He would bring us to, it seems that that seems to be the heat of our troubles. For this is a journey that we're in. This is a journey that we are walking in, and as long as we're here, we have not arrived. As long as we're here in this earth and we occupy these earthen vessels, we have not arrived. As long as we're here on this earth and we breathe the breath of life, we have not arrived. And while we're here, there's a fight that's raging. While we're here, there's a battle that's going on. As we mentioned in prayer, there's a consistent battle between our flesh and our spirit. But sometimes it's not just an internal battle that we're fighting. It's not just our internal enemy or our enemy that's this flesh that we're fighting. But sometimes there are enemies that pop up from all over the place. There are enemies that come from every side. For here David, who was king, who was in a position of exaltation, he was the ruler of all Israel. And yet he was running for his life. Yet he was in flight for his life. And in the process of running for his life, in the process of running away from his own son, who was trying to destroy and take over the kingdom, there rose up a man out of the house of Saul. You see, his name was Shimei, and Shimei had a chip on his shoulder, so to speak. You see, Shimei, as a part of the house of Saul, he at one point probably relished in being a part of the house of Saul because Saul was king and Saul was a ruler. But when Saul's house came down, so did the glory. So did the glory of the house of Saul. That's right. When Saul's house came to naught, so did all that were associated with that house. You see, oftentimes men are looking for glory. Men are looking for to be exalted and to be lifted up. We know that only the Lord deserves all glory. As we sang that song today, only He deserves all glory and all honor. That's right. But there are men who are seeking for glory for themselves. That's right. There are men who seek to have that glory and seek to be exalted and seek to be high and lifted up. All you to know that I'm telling the truth, all you have to do is watch the rich and the famous and see how people crowd around them. See how people try to get in their good graces. See how you have groupies following around them. Why? Because there's something about man that desires glory. There's something about man that desires power. And some will stop at nothing to get it.